naysayers and a fair amount of gloom in terms of a looming recession, given what's happening globally. Fair to say that India still seems largely resilient and insulated from what we are seeing globally. And it's no surprise that it is still set to be the second fastest growing economy in the G20 in 22-23. And there are a fair amount of factors which are coming into play. And what is interesting to note is that this is despite the overall slowing down in global demand and also the inflationary pressure that we are seeing globally as well as in India. And I think that is where understanding on how the different sectors have played out comes really important. In COVID, we saw many domestic sectors struggle and global sectors continue to do well. And now the tables have turned a little bit. We are seeing a fair amount of demand coming from domestic consumption. And as a result, sectors which are aligned strongly to the domestic story or the India story are doing really well. Whereas we are seeing a little bit of plateauing and mutinying of business sentiment when we look at globally aligned sectors. And that is something that will play out in the increments as well. At the same time, I think the government has done well to focus and continue to focus on financial inclusion and spending on infrastructure. And a lot of this was also coming out very clearly in the budget numbers that were announced a few weeks back. Export orientation continues to be very, very strong for India. And that is, again, something which has augured well. Clearly, this remains well oriented, especially for the services sector. And of course, the progressive entry into different trade agreements with majority partners is helping prospects of export as well. Nevertheless, there are some headwinds as well. And as inflation and energy bills keep rising, and of course, the widening of the current account deficit is going to put pressure on how the overall business sentiment plays out. Of course, if the geopolitical uncertainty were to sort of slow down, that will also have very strong positive impact on how the overall business sentiment plays out. But another heartening trend that we are seeing is that unemployment estimates are now seeing better and improving labor market conditions both in the urban and rural areas. However, this continues to have an impact on the wage spiral, which we'll again talk about when we bring into play the salary increments. Interestingly, linked very strongly to the overall macro sentiment, which is being driven more by tailwinds than headwinds, the business outlook, as responded to by organization, also seems to be in line with the overall optimism in spite of the gloom around us globally. And what we have done is we have analyzed three broad parameters which we believe are really talking about the business outlook. One is the growth sentiment in the business, as organizations have responded. Second is the overall hiring outlook for this year. And third is the salary increase outlook. And if you look at the slide, each of these three continue to be almost in perfect unison and tandem. While we can see pockets of high growth slowing down to around about 20%, but moderate growth is more than 50%. And very hearteningly, the decline is only minuscule 1%. Similarly, in the hiring outlook, it's far away from what we had seen in 2021, where the hiring freeze was a very large number. Very aggressive hiring is slowing down 20%, but normal hiring is again above 50%, and the hiring freeze is down to just about 3%. And no surprises that salary increases follow a very similar pattern. Very high growth of salary increments, above 12% as we categorize, is a small amount, around about 13%, but a majority, almost 3/4 of organizations are talking about a 9 to 12% salary increase, which is a very heartening number out here. And again, less than 6% is only 3% of the organization, which again corroborates with what we are seeing in the business growth and hiring outlook. As a result, driven by the stronger business outlook and driven by the stronger macroeconomic agenda, we are seeing hiring outlook and salary increase outlook also mirror a very similar picture. Now, how does the numbers compare globally? And this is something which really brings into light a lot of different parameters. Let's look at globally first. If you look at most of the larger economies, as well as BRIC nations or Asian economies, India continues to lead not only with the highest GDP growth, but also with the highest salary increase. Having said that, if you look at big markets like the US, they have done well to recover from very high inflation last year and better outlook on business, which also makes them see one of the highest numbers for salary increases in recent years at 5.2%. UK has a different story. Their inflation continues to be a big problem at around about 9%, and their salary increase numbers being again very high at 4.8% comparatively continue to mirror the troubles with inflation they continue to have. Japan, China, Philippines, Indonesia are more stable, but continue to have a much lower outlook on salary increases than what we have seen in the past. And not surprisingly, uh, India's numbers on GDP continue to be the highest, though lesser than last year. The fight against inflation continues to be showing resilience, and inflation is obviously curbed by the uh, monetary policy measures that the RBI has employed. But more importantly, in spite of some focus on the recession and possible softening of numbers, we see that salary increase projections are almost similar to what we had seen as last year. From a 10.6 number, we have come down to 10.3, which is still double digit and which is still amongst the highest that we have seen in India in the last many years. And what it also shows is a fairly robust and high real rate of increase because we've been able to curb inflation, but salary increase numbers continue to be in the double digit era. And that is what really plays on if we bring into perspective what is happening with the salary increase numbers. Fair to say that double-digit salary increases seem to be still on India's case because 10.6% number we had seen last year was after almost a hiatus of 8 years, right? And we continue to see double-digit increases this year as well. So that's 2 years in a row. At the same time, the salary increase number for top performers continues to be amongst the highest as well in the last 10 years at 16.5%. What that really says is that while overall numbers seem to be fairly bullish at double digit, India Inc. is still being very focused on performance differentiation and giving a much higher increase to its higher performers and hence focusing on meritocracy. So it's good to be in India with the highest double digit increase, but it's even better to be a top performer with almost a 16.5% increase being given. And as I had mentioned earlier, at 5.2%, this is a much higher real rate of increase that we have seen in India since 2018, the last 5 years, which again augurs well for employees because we've been able to bring inflation under control and salary increases continue to follow the trend of what we had seen last year as well. With that, I will now hand over to Pratish. This was just a very quick macro perspective on what salary increases are looking like. And I will ask Pratish now to decode what this means by different sectors, by different levels of management, by merit, non-merit, and most importantly, how this corroborates and correlates to attrition numbers, which have been high over the last 2 years. Pratish, over to you.
Thank you, Rupang. So in this section, we start off by first discussing salary dispersion or increased dispersion. Now, what's increased dispersion? It's the difference between the highest increase and the lowest increase in a particular industry. Now, the salary dispersion helps us to understand how different organizations within the industry are dealing with volatility, dealing with wage bill growth, dealing with productivity increases, and so on and so forth. Now, organizations with the highest salary increases are typically focused on sectors such as technology, services, technology platforms, and global capability centers. Now, why that's happening is that we have seen varying levels of organization performance in these sectors. So some organizations have really outgrown the quicker adoption of new technologies, while other organizations, are still in the course of updating their offerings and therefore haven't grown as fast. The second is business volatility. Globally connected sectors have obviously seen higher business volatility with the Ukraine war, higher than expected inflation in Europe, and an anticipated increase in interest rates in US. And what has also happened is that organizations in the sectors with the maximum dispersion are experimenting with new business models and new ways of value creation. And organizations who find success in the new ways of value creation are able to give a far higher increase, and therefore leading to higher dispersion in the sector. On the other hand, which are the sectors which have less salary dispersion? So these sectors tend to have mature HR practices, have cadre-based talent management programs, and tend to be in concentrated industries. The best example here is the FMCG industry. FMCG industry across the top 12, 10 to 12 players has deeply entrenched graduate trainee and management trainee programs. They have clearly outlined cadre-based promotion policies, and over a period of time, what has happened is that the top 10 FMCG companies have moved closer and closer in their increment levels to each other. Uh, Now, if you look at concentrated industries such as energy and chemicals, these industries have typically a few players who are disproportionately larger than the other players, and in a sense, they set the uh, ball rolling for salary increases, which the other industry players copy. So, uh, essentially, while India therefore is seeing double-digit salary increases, with the dispersion, there are organizations which may see as low as 5% salary increase, and on the other hand, as high as 14.2% salary increase. Now, one very important thing which we wanted to cover in this study is the difference between merit and non-merit increase. So, what's a merit increase? A merit increase is typically given annually as a part of the appraisal process, and the key driver for this increase is the performance or and the promotion, of the colleague involved. So because therefore, they are uh, contingent on the value of the individual and the value delivered to the organization. They are called non-merit increases. Now, non-merit increases are typically increases which are outside the salary cycle or even within the cycle, which are not necessarily for the value of individual, but for certain corrective actions which the organizations need to take. So one corrective action may be market competitiveness. So salaries may have moved up in a particular industry because of higher attrition, increase in talent demand, entry of a new large competitor. So market correction is one reason for off cycle non-merit increases. The second thing is retention. Now, with attrition being at an all-time high, organizations are often willing to make counter offers as well as uh, bake in retention plans to make their talent stay with them. And retention, therefore, is another uh, factor, to drive salary increases. Now, progressive organizations are also looking at uh, proactively differentiating increases for hot skills and wherever correction is needed to drive greater gender parity uh, in pay. Uh, Another way to understand this is that if we look at 2018, about 14% of the total increase was discretionary. What it means is that in 2018, there was lesser talent volatility. And because of that less talent volatility, rewards managers were able to drive a formulaic increase process. Now, if we look at 2023, the projected 2023 numbers, almost 25% of the total increase budget is going on non-merit increase. What it indicates is a rise in discretion.
The tiny cities